$400, 13 plants. One summer that taught me everything I should have known before I spent a single cent at the garden center. I've been container gardening for over 40 years. I know what zone I'm in, I know my soil, I know the difference between full sun and part shade, and I still made 13 expensive mistakes in the span of one season, because the industry that sells you plants has very little incentive to tell you what they don't want you to know. This video is about that. Every plant on this list is commonly sold at big box garden centers. Every plant on this list has a pretty tag with a smiling flower on it, and every single one of them gave me a problem I didn't sign up for. Root-bound containers, cracked pots, summer die-off, invasive spread into surrounding beds, or just flat-out collapse the moment temperatures shifted. I'm not talking about cheap plants either. Some of these were $15, $20, $30 each. Some I bought in multiples because the display at the garden center looked so convincing. Number 1 on this list broke its container by August. Not from disease, not from neglect, from pure, unstoppable growth underground, and I'll explain exactly what happened and what the tag didn't say. Stay with me through number 13. Because that one didn't just cost me money. It cost me 2 full seasons of repair work. Let's start with the one that looked the most innocent on the shelf. Before we get into the list, I want to ask you something. Drop your USDA hardiness zone in the comments below. Some of these mistakes are universal. They apply to every gardener in every zone. But a few of them depend entirely on where you live. Zone 4 in Minnesota and Zone 8 in Georgia have very different container challenges, and I want to make sure what I'm sharing is actually relevant to your garden. Tell me your zone. It helps me make better videos, and it helps the people watching alongside you who may be in the same situation. I want to be clear about what this list is and what it isn't. This is not a list of bad plants. Several of them are genuinely beautiful. Several would perform extremely well in the right situation. In the ground, in a large landscape, with access to consistent irrigation. The problem is how they're positioned and sold specifically for container use, which is a fundamentally different growing environment. A container limits root space. It amplifies heat in summer. It dries out 3 to 4 times faster than the same soil volume in the ground. And it concentrates whatever growth pattern a plant naturally has, whether that's spreading, seeding, rooting aggressively, or simply requiring enormous water volume, into a space you didn't fully plan for. The 13 plants I'm about to walk through were all sold to me with the implied promise that they'd perform well in a pot, on a porch, or patio. Some of them did, for about 3 weeks. The rest of the season is the part the garden center doesn't show you in their display. Sources for this video include the Missouri Botanical Garden, University of Minnesota Extension, and Rutgers Cooperative Extension. Links are in the description below. Plant number 1, sweet potato vine, Ipomoea batatas, sold as an ornamental in zones 9 through 11, but grown as an annual in most of the country, zones 3 through 8. I bought 3 of them. 1 chartreuse, 1 purple, 1 dark bronze. They were $4 each. They looked gorgeous in the 6-inch pots at the garden center. I planted all 3 with a thriller plant in a 16-inch container and stood back feeling satisfied. By week 3, they were trailing 8 inches in every direction. By week 6, they had completely buried the thriller plant, which I had paid $12 for, under a mat of dense foliage. By August, the tubers, and nobody mentioned the tubers, had grown so large inside the container that the sides of the plastic pot had cracked. Not chipped, cracked, structural failure. Here's what the tag doesn't tell you. Ipomoea batatas produces actual sweet potato tubers underground. In the ground, those tubers spread and expand into the surrounding soil with room to move. In a container, they have nowhere to go. They push outward against the walls. Most standard plastic or lightweight containers will not survive a full growing season with a mature sweet potato vine inside. The Missouri Botanical Garden classifies sweet potato vine as a vigorous tropical perennial grown as an annual in temperate climates. The word they use is vigorous. What they mean is relentless. If you want that trailing, colorful effect in a container, which is real and it is beautiful, look at Lysimachia nummularia, commonly known as creeping jenny. It gives you a similar lime green trailing look. It's a zone 3 perennial, so it comes back every year and it will not crack your pot. Sweet potato vine is not a bad plant. It is a bad container plant. The distinction matters when you're standing in the garden center with $12 in your hand. Plant number 2, Morning Glory, Ipomoea purpurea, annual. Sold in seed form and as transplants throughout the United States every spring. This one is on the list not because of what it did in the container. It's on the list because of what it did after the container. Morning Glory is one of the most aggressively self-seeding plants in the American garden. One container of Morning Glory in a productive summer will produce hundreds of viable seeds. Those seeds drop into surrounding pots, into cracks in your deck, into the soil at the base of your porch stairs. The following spring, you will find morning glory seedlings in places you never planted anything. Rutgers Cooperative Extension lists several Ipomoa species among the most problematic invasive self-seeders in garden settings. The ornamental varieties sold at garden centers are not exceptions to this pattern. In the container itself, morning glory will grow. It will twine and climb. It will bloom blue and purple and magenta, and it looks exactly like the picture on the seed packet. That part is accurate. What you don't see in the picture is July, when the vines have completely engulfed the trellis, spread to the adjacent container, and are working their way along the railing toward your gutters. I spent more time cutting back morning glory last summer than I spent managing every other container combined. If you want vertical color in a container, consider Thunbergia alata, commonly called black-eyed Susan vine. Same climbing habit, similar bloom size, broadly available in most garden centers. University of Minnesota Extension recommends it specifically for container trellises in zones 3 through 9 as an annual, and it does not self-seed with the same aggression. Morning glory is beautiful. I understand why people grow it. I will not plant it again in a container surrounded by other managed plantings. Plant number 3, mint, Mentha times piperita, USDA zone 3 through 8, full sun to part shade. Mint is on this list for a specific reason that isn't obvious when you buy it. It spreads laterally through underground stolons, and those stolons do not respect the walls of a container. I planted spearmint in a 12-inch terracotta pot positioned on my patio beside a small raised bed. Within 8 weeks, stolons had worked their way out through the drainage hole into the soil of the adjacent bed and established a colony roughly 6 inches into an area where I was growing tomatoes. The tomato roots were physically competing with mint by midsummer. Mint in the ground is a well-documented invasive management problem. The standard advice, repeated in virtually every gardening guide for decades, is to plant mint in a container to contain it. What that advice doesn't account for is that your container has a drainage hole, and mint will find it. The Missouri Botanical Garden explicitly notes that all Mentha species spread aggressively via underground rhizomes and stolons, and recommends careful management even in container culture. If you want mint, and I understand completely, it smells remarkable and has real culinary value, there are 2 approaches that actually work. Plant it in a solid bottom container with no drainage hole, elevated on a stand so overflow can be manually managed. Or grow it in a hanging basket where the stolons have nowhere to travel. The mistake I made was treating the pot as the solution. It was the beginning of a second problem. For container herb growing without the spread problem, consider basil, thyme, or rosemary. All 3 grow well in containers. All 3 stay where you put them. The University of Minnesota Extension recommends all 3 specifically for patio growing across zones 3 through 9. Plant number 4, caladium. Caladium bicolor, also sold under the name caladium times hortulanum. Tropical perennial, grown as an annual north of zone 9. Caladium is one of the most visually striking plants you can put in a shaded container. The leaf patterns, white, pink, red, patterned green, are genuinely spectacular. I bought 4 of them, spending about $11 each, which felt reasonable given how dramatic they looked in the display. The problem with caladium in containers is twofold. First, it is one of the most cold-sensitive plants commonly sold at garden centers. A single night below 50 Fahrenheit, not freezing, just 50 degrees, will cause visible leaf damage on caladium. Below 45 Fahrenheit and the leaves will begin to collapse. I'm in zone 6B. We get cool August nights. I lost 2 of my 4 plants to a single unremarkable cold stretch in late August that most gardeners in my zone would not even register as unusual weather. Second, caladium requires consistent moisture and high humidity. In a container positioned where it receives afternoon sun, the soil temperature at root level can reach 90 to 95 Fahrenheit on a summer afternoon, conditions that actively stress caladium bicolor regardless of how frequently you water. The Missouri Botanical Garden notes that caladiums prefer bright indirect light and consistent moisture, with particular sensitivity to cold drafts and temperature fluctuation, conditions that are extremely difficult to control in an outdoor container setting in temperate zones. If you want dramatic foliage in a shaded container that actually survives a full season, consider Herkera, coral bells, zone 4 through 9. Comes back every year. Handles container conditions far better than caladium, available in dark bronze, burgundy, and chartreuse. The cultivar Midnight Rose or Palace Purple gives you that rich foliage depth without the cold sensitivity window. Caladium is not a mistake if you're in zone 9 or 10. If you're north of that, you are buying a very expensive annual with a very narrow operating range. Plant number 5, wave petunias. Petunia times hybrida, sold under trade names including wave, supertunia, and tidal wave, annual across all zones. I want to be careful here because wave petunias are genuinely among the best performing annuals available for containers. The bloom is reliable. The color is intense. The trailing habit is exactly what you want in a mixed container or a window box. I understand completely why they're everywhere, but I regret buying them, and here is why. The maintenance requirement is not disclosed on the tag, and it is significant. Wave petunias require deadheading consistently, every 3 to 4 days to maintain peak bloom. In hot climates, they also require mid-season cutting back when they go leggy, which typically happens around July. Skip either of those tasks and you have a container of bare, tangled stems with a few flowers at the very tips. I have a large patio with 14 containers. Managing deadheading across all 14, plus 2 rounds of mid-season cutback, became a part-time obligation I had not planned for. There is also the fertilizer requirement. Wave petunias are heavy feeders. Without weekly liquid fertilizer during peak growth, they stall out and go off color. The University of Minnesota Extension recommends feeding petunia containers every 7 to 10 days with a balanced fertilizer throughout the growing season. Maintenance that compounds significantly over a full summer. If you want low-maintenance trailing color for containers, consider calibrachoa, sometimes called million bells. It is in the same family, produces smaller flowers in significant quantity, is far less demanding in terms of deadheading, and holds its shape better through midsummer without mid-season cutback. Available at most garden centers in the same color range as wave petunias. I have since replaced my wave petunia containers with calibrachoa. I do not miss the maintenance schedule. Plant number 6, bleeding heart, Lamprocapno spectabilis, formerly classified as Dicentra spectabilis, USDA zone 3 through 9, part shade to full shade. Bleeding heart is one of the most beautiful early-season perennials available in the American garden. The arching stems and pendant flowers in April and May are genuinely extraordinary. In a shaded container on a north-facing porch, they look like something from a botanical garden display. The problem is what happens next. Lamprocapno spectabilis goes summer dormant. In most zones by late June or early July, the foliage has yellowed, collapsed, and disappeared entirely from the container. What you're left with is an empty pot, or worse, a container that still holds the yellowed, dying foliage while you decide what to do with it. I planted bleeding heart in 4 large containers on my shaded porch. They were magnificent in May. By the 4th of July, they were gone. I had 4 large, expensive containers with nothing in them at the height of summer, precisely the moment when guests arrive and you actually want the porch to look its best. The Missouri Botanical Garden notes this characteristic clearly. Lamprocapno spectabilis is a spring ephemeral in the sense that its foliage completely dies back in summer, leaving a gap in the planting that requires planting or succession planting with other species. The solution, if you still want bleeding heart and it is worth growing, is to plan for succession from the beginning. Plant it in a container with a shade-tolerant annual that will fill in when the bleeding heart goes dormant. Impatiens or Begonia boliviensis are both good options for that transition, and they thrive in the same shaded conditions. I didn't plan for succession. I bought the bleeding heart because it was beautiful in April, without thinking once about what July would look like. That is the mistake. Plant number 7, astilbe, Astilbe arensi, USDA zone 4 through 9, part shade to full shade. Astilbe is one of the few perennials that performs reliably in shade, which is exactly why shade gardeners love it and why I bought it. 6 plants, 2 containers, about $8 each. The problem with astilbe in containers comes down to one thing: water. In the ground, astilbe's root system can extend several feet in every direction to find moisture. In a container, it can access only what is in the pot, and astilbe is a genuinely thirsty plant. In summer heat, a 12-inch container with an established astilbe will need watering every single day, sometimes twice per day, or the plant shows visible heat stress within 24 hours. The feathery plumes collapse, the leaf margins brown, the plant looks as though it is dying even when it isn't. I was watering my astilbe containers daily through June and July. When I left for a 5-day trip in late July, I came back to 2 containers that appeared completely dead. They were not. Both recovered after consistent watering over 2 weeks, but the foliage damage was permanent for the remainder of that season. The University of Minnesota Extension notes that astilbe performs best with consistent soil moisture and partial shade, and specifically warns that container-grown astilbe requires significantly more frequent irrigation than the same plant established in the ground. If you want shade-tolerant perennial color for containers that handles drying out with more resilience, consider Helleborus, hellebore. Zone 4 through 9, blooms in early spring, more drought-tolerant once established than astilbe. Handles container conditions far more reliably, and the foliage persists year-round in most zones. Astilbe is a magnificent garden plant. It is a difficult container plant. The water requirement alone should disqualify it from most container situations unless you have drip irrigation or an extremely consistent hand watering schedule. 7 plants in, we're halfway through the list. Before we continue, I want to say something directly. If any of these plants are currently growing in your containers right now, don't panic. Most of them can be removed at the end of the season without permanent damage to the container or the surrounding garden. Several of the perennials on this list, astilbe, bleeding heart, heuchera alternatives, would perform significantly better if transplanted into the ground, where their root systems have room to function properly. What I'm not saying is that these plants are worthless. They are not. The problem is the mismatch between how they're sold and what container culture actually requires from them. That's a different problem than the plant itself. If this video has been useful to you, share it with one person who container gardens. It helps the channel and it might save them $30 or $40 this season. 6 more plants. Plant number 8, Canna lily, Canna times generalis, hardy perennial in zones 8 through 12, grown as an annual in zones 3 through 7, requiring rhizome storage over winter. I bought canna lilies because they are dramatic. Large tropical foliage, bold color, architectural height, everything you want in a large statement container. They delivered on the visual. They did not deliver on the practical. The problem with canna in containers is scale. A mature canna lily reaches 4 to 6 feet in height and produces rhizomes aggressively throughout the growing season. Those rhizomes need space. In a standard 20-gallon container, which is already large and heavy, a canna lily will become root-bound by midsummer. I had 3 plants in 3 containers. By August, all 3 had rhizomes visibly emerging through the drainage holes, and then October arrived. I'm in Zone 6B. That means digging up the rhizomes before first frost, allowing them to cure at room temperature, then storing them in a cool, dry location through winter, and replanting in spring. That process took me nearly 2 hours per container. The root mass in each pot had expanded so significantly during one growing season that I couldn't identify where one plant's roots ended and the next began. The Missouri Botanical Garden notes that canna rhizomes must be stored at 45 to 50 Fahrenheit in dry conditions for winter survival in temperate zones. Conditions most gardeners do not have reliably available. If you want tropical drama in a container without the winter storage requirement, consider Eucamus comosa, pineapple lily. Zone 7 through 10, similar architectural presence. Far more container-appropriate root system, and it does not ask for 2 hours of your time in October. Canna is not a regret because of how it looks. It is a regret because of what it demands in return. Plant number 9, elephant ears, Colocasia esculenta, hardy in zones 8 through 12, grown as an annual in most of the continental United States. I want to be specific about why this one is on the list, because it is among the most commonly purchased container plants sold in this country every spring. Colocasia esculenta is sold at garden centers nationwide in 1-gallon pots for $7 to $10. The tag shows a lush tropical leaf. The plant delivers exactly that. It grows fast and it grows large. A single elephant ear tuber will produce a plant 3 to 5 feet tall with leaves 18 to 30 inches across. In a decorative patio container, it is visually spectacular for approximately 6 weeks. Then it starts asking for more. Colocasia esculenta is a marginal aquatic plant in its native habitat. It requires consistent, high moisture, not just regular watering, but constant soil moisture at the root zone. In a container in summer heat, this plant will wilt visibly if not watered every morning. On afternoons above 85 Fahrenheit, some containers need a second watering before dinner. I had a large container on a south-facing deck. Midsummer conditions, high humidity, full afternoon sun. I watered every morning without exception. By 3 p.m. on any hot day, the leaves looked like the plant was in distress. It wasn't dying. It simply requires more water than a container can realistically deliver through once daily watering and heat. And then, same as canna. In Zone 6B, the tubers must be dug before frost and stored through winter. One tuber became 11 over one growing season. The storage requirement alone occupied more space than I had planned for. University of Minnesota Extension recommends elephant ears for containers only with automatic drip irrigation or an extremely consistent hand-watering routine, and explicitly notes the overwinter storage requirement for all gardeners north of Zone 8. Plant number 10, Rose of Sharon, Hibiscus syriacus, USDA Zone 5 through 9, full sun to part shade. I planted Rose of Sharon in a large container because I wanted late summer bloom, a window where container plants genuinely underperform compared to the ground garden. Hibiscus syriacus blooms July through September, right when most annuals are flagging. The flowers are large and showy. The plant was sold with a photo of a full, flowering specimen, and it delivered exactly that. What I did not understand was the seed production. Hibiscus syriacus is one of the most prolific self-seeders in the temperate garden. A single mature specimen produces hundreds of seeds per season. In the ground, this means volunteers throughout the surrounding landscape the following spring. In a container situation, where the container is positioned on a patio or deck surrounded by cracks, crevices, raised beds, and adjacent soil, It means seedlings in every crack in your hardscape by mid-May. I spent portions of 3 consecutive springs pulling rows of Sharon seedlings from places I never intentionally planted anything. They germinated in the gaps between deck boards, in the gravel path adjacent to the porch, in the base of my raised beds. Rutgers Cooperative Extension explicitly lists Hibiscus syriacus as a problematic invasive self-seeder in many eastern and midwestern states, and recommends purchasing sterile cultivars if you intend to grow it near managed garden areas. Sterile cultivars, Minerva, Diana, and Helen among them, exist and are available through specialty nurseries. The standard plants sold at big box garden centers are overwhelmingly the fertile, prolific seeding types. This is not disclosed on the tag. If you want late summer container bloom without the seed problem, consider Hydrangea paniculata Little Lime, container adaptable, zone 3 through 8, does not self-seed, blooms reliably from midsummer through fall. Plant number 11, maiden grass, Miscanthus sinensis, USDA zone 5 through 9, full sun. Ornamental grasses look extraordinary in containers. The movement in the wind, the texture, the architectural presence, nothing else provides that visual quality in quite the same way. I bought Miscanthus sinensis gracilis in a 5-gallon nursery container, transferred it into a 20-gallon decorative ceramic pot, and considered the job finished. I was finished for 1 season. Miscanthus sinensis grows from a central crown that expands aggressively year after year. In the ground, you divide the clump every 3 to 4 years, and the plant remains vigorous. In a container, the crown expansion pushes outward against the walls, the root system becomes completely pot-bound within 1 to 2 seasons, and the center of the plant begins to die. A characteristic called center dieback, well documented in container-grown ornamental grasses grown beyond their ideal size range. By year 2, the gracilimus had cracked the decorative ceramic container from the inside out. The root mass, when I finally extracted it, was so dense it required a reciprocating saw to divide properly. The Missouri Botanical Garden notes that Miscanthus sinensis cultivars require division every 2 to 3 years to maintain vigor, and specifically cautions against long-term container culture for most established cultivars. Ornamental grasses that work in containers do exist. Festuca glauca, blue fescue, is zone 4 through 8, compact, slow-growing, and can persist in a container for several seasons without structural damage. Carex species, sedges, are also reliable container performers with far less aggressive root expansion. If you want grass movement in your container plantings, choose species sized appropriately for the container. Miscanthus sinensis was never meant to live in a pot, and the garden center display where it was sold in a decorative pot does not tell you how that story ends. Plant number 12, running bamboo, Philostachys aurea, commonly sold as golden bamboo or fishpole bamboo, USDA zone 6 through 11. This one I include with some reluctance, because the warning against planting running bamboo without serious containment measures is decades old and widely published. I knew the warning, I still made the mistake. I bought a 5-gallon container of Philostachys aurea from a specialty nursery, the kind of operation that should know better, and they sold it without a single word about rhizome management. I planted it in a 30-gallon container, specifically because I had read that container planting was the safe way to grow running bamboo in a managed garden space. That advice is partially correct. For approximately 14 months. By month 15, the rhizomes, which can exert extraordinary lateral pressure against any barrier, had fractured the bottom seam of my heavy-duty polyethylene container. From the fracture point, they entered the soil beneath the patio. I didn't detect the problem for another 3 months. By the time I identified it, I had rhizomes running under 8 linear feet of hardscape. The removal required 2 full weekends and a pickaxe. Rutgers Cooperative Extension classifies Philostachys aurea as invasive in many eastern states and explicitly states that container planting is not a reliable long-term containment method for rhizomatous bamboo, as rhizomes will eventually breach any non-reinforced container through drainage gaps or structural fatigue. If you want the bamboo aesthetic, tall screening, vertical privacy, that specific movement, consider Fargesia rufa or Fargesia murielae, the clumping bamboos. Zone 5 through 9, no running rhizomes. They stay where you plant them. They will not destroy your patio. Philostachys aurea is a plant that appears controllable right up until it isn't. The container does not change that characteristic. It only delays it. Plant number 13, wisteria. Wisteria sinensis, Chinese wisteria. USDA zone 5 through 9, full sun to part shade. I saved this one for last. Not because it is the most obscure mistake on the list, because it is the most common one. And because the distance between how wisteria is sold and what wisteria actually is may be the largest gap in container plant marketing I have ever personally experienced. Wisteria is sold everywhere, in small 4-inch pots at the checkout lane of garden centers, as a container vine in online plant listings, on curated lists of best patio plants and balcony climbing plants. Every April, when the photographs of wisteria-draped pergolas and stone walls circulate across every gardening platform, people go to the garden center and find a small pot with 3 pale leaves on it and a $4 tag and take it home without a second thought. I did exactly that. More than once across multiple seasons. Here is what wisteria is. Wisteria sinensis is a woody vine that at maturity reaches 30 feet in length with woody stems that can exceed 15 inches in diameter at the base. It is classified as an invasive species in 29 states by the USDA Invasive Plant Atlas. Gardeners in the American South have documented wisteria girdling trees, cracking brick foundations, collapsing fence lines, and toppling arbors and pergolas that were not specifically engineered to support the weight of a mature specimen. These are not rare incidents. They are the predictable outcome of wisteria grown in situations it was never meant for. In a container, none of that is apparent immediately. In year 1, a container-grown wisteria will grow enthusiastically. It puts out new leaves, maybe some preliminary twining, possibly a few buds. It will look manageable. You will think you understand what you have. In year 2, the plant is larger. The stem has begun to thicken noticeably. The root system has filled whatever container you've given it. It may or may not bloom at this stage. Wisteria notoriously withholds flower production for the first 5 to 10 years in many conditions, and blooming requires a specific combination of root restriction, precise pruning at the right time of year, and in some cases, deliberate root disturbance to trigger the reproductive response. Experienced growers sometimes use container culture intentionally to coax reluctant wisteria into bloom, but that technique assumes you know exactly what you are doing with a plant that is fundamentally a 30-foot woody structure. Most people buying a $4 pot of wisteria at the garden center do not know this. I did not know this. I thought I was buying a flowering vine for my porch post. By year 3 of my container experiment, the vine had climbed the post, wrapped around a horizontal railing support, and begun embedding its stem into the wood. The grip of a mature wisteria stem is comparable to a cable under tension. I cut it back to the base. It responded by producing 3 new stems from the cut point within 3 weeks. I cut those. 6 more grew. The plant had established a root system in the container that was generating more above-ground growth than I could manage by cutting alone. I attempted full removal in the fall of year 3. The root system had exited through the drainage holes and established itself in the compacted soil beneath my porch. Concrete over fill. I broke up a 3-foot section of decorative concrete to access and extract the root crown. The process took the better part of a Saturday. The Missouri Botanical Garden describes Wisteria sinensis as extremely invasive and specifically advises against planting it near structures. The Missouri Botanical Garden does not list it as a recommended container plant. Rutgers Cooperative Extension does not either. Neither does University of Minnesota Extension. It appears on container plant lists because it is beautiful in flower and because it sells reliably every spring when the photographs are in circulation. I am not telling you not to grow wisteria. I am telling you to know exactly what you are agreeing to before you bring it home. If you want a flowering vine for a container, something that provides height, vertical interest, and genuine bloom, consider clematis, specifically Clematis times jackmanii or any of the large-flowered clematis hybrids. Zone 4 through 9. Fully container adaptable, pruned back hard in late winter and regrown fresh each season. It will not crack your foundation. It will not grip your porch post with 15-inch woody stems. The National Garden Bureau has specifically recommended clematis for container culture, noting its adaptability to pot life when given a support structure and consistent moisture. Or consider Mandevilla times amabilis, widely available as an annual in zones below 9, grows enthusiastically in containers through the summer, produces large tropical flowers in red and pink, and at the end of the season you simply cut it back and let it go. No embedded stems, no concrete demolition. Wisteria is an extraordinary plant for an extraordinary gardener with extraordinary structural support, an extraordinary amount of space, and the patience for a decade-long project. It is not a container plant. It was never a container plant. The fact that it is sold in containers at garden centers every April does not make it one. That is the